When a major flood hit a North London street, little did the residents know that the damage and destruction would reveal that a dangerous serial killer had been living amongst them. This is the story of how one brave woman almost fell victim to a killer, and how a freak accident saved her life.
I've moved into Axton Court in the April of that year, flat sharing with a friend of a friend. Although my friend hadn't informed me about her friend Sandy was in fact a guy. I just assumed that Sandy was a girl. I mean, it was no issue initially. I'm cool with that, I guess. I just wasn't prepared. Anyway, the block was nice, just not the friendliest compared to blocks I'd lived in before. I'm all about greeting the neighbours with a friendly smile and their friendly small talk. It just seems odd not to, especially when you share this kind of little space with them. But I'd be surprised if the residents of Axton Court don't suffer later on with net problems from their general inability to raise their heads and smile back.
Kay had initially settled in well to Axton Court. It was a comfortable room in a clean flat, with an easy commute into her office at Victoria, as well as being near the vibrant Stoke Newington with all its bars and restaurants. Although her dad wasn't best pleased with the area, when the day he helped her move in, he saw a weather-beaten poster of a missing woman around Kay's age, pinned to a tree outside the block.
Yeah, my dad was not happy when he read that. His jaw literally dropped. And then so did my box of plates he was holding. Good times. A neighbour walking past said something like, "Don't worry, it's just another prostitute. They go missing like Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages." This was around the Coved inquiry. Me and my dad just looked on horrified that the guy had said this. But for different reasons, as it turned out. My dad turned and said, I can't believe there's prostitutes down there. That's the hound you might be able to hear as my arm is rolling.
Sandy was rarely home, and when he was, he'd spend most of his time in his room. Initially it annoyed Kay as she was eager for company. Being new to London, she hadn't made many connections and friends at that point, and so outside of work, she was eager to socialise.
Oh God, yeah, but to be honest, when I did see him, it was really awkward. He'd fumble his sentences and then say some inappropriate things, like about girls he worked with. Just the way he described them made me feel a bit odd and queasy, so that wasn't great.
But about 2 weeks after moving in, her look changed a little.
I was checking my mail in the foyer one night after work, and this hottie, who I hadn't seen before, comes in and checks his mail next to me. Now, I don't know if it was because Sandy was beginning to creep me out or that no one in the block so much as smiled at me, but this guy saying hello with his warm little smile turned me to butter in a fab. I melted. For a cute-looking guy to simply smile and say, "Hey," goes to show how desperate for attention I was. So later we had a chat, and it was good. He was nice, and I didn't come across as too much of a desperate psychopath, which was refreshing.
But around this time, Kay noticed Sandy acting even stranger, from coming home late in the middle of the night to spending all day in his room. And when he did appear, he'd tell her that the streets were too dangerous for a woman like her and warn her of going out alone, which unnerved her.
Yes, living with Sandy was starting to bother me, but I'd made friends with Al. By this point, the hot guy from downstairs, after a few purposely timed trips to check my mail. We'd chatted in the foyer for the best part of an hour one night. He hid in the basement flat, as it turned out. But he knew I lived on the 4th floor, so he had noticed me. That was a victory for a desperate Kay. He made a joke that being in a basement meant he didn't see much light, and then I made a joke that he'd make a good vampire. Well, look, I didn't say it was a good joke, but anyway, he'd recently moved to London too, so we had that in common, and so naturally I saw that as a perfect opportunity to exchange numbers and, suggest that we navigate this huge, lonely city together. And so we texted each other, and quite regularly, as a matter of fact.
But back in her apartment, the picture wasn't as rosy. Kay became convinced that things were being moved in her room and that possibly Sandy was coming in when she was out, or even worse, while she was sleeping.
I first noticed a wet stain next to my bed after I came back from work one night. It was clearly from where a cup next to my bed had spilt, but the cup had been put back on the side table, leaving just this wet mark. Firstly, I don't remember doing that. And secondly, I'm a bit OCD when it comes to things like this, and I would never have put the cup back without mopping up that stain like a crazy lad woman. The other thing that really creeped me out is waking up to my wardrobe door being open. Again, back to my OCD, I could never sleep with the door open. I couldn't bear the cupboard girls watching me whilst I slept. And I'm only half joking about that, by the way. I always close it, and this door had a latch, so it's not open accidentally.
Kay began to get freaked out, but not wanting to alarm her already nervous father and not really making any solid friendship groups in London at that point, she messaged Al, her new friend from downstairs, and shared her thoughts with him over WhatsApp.
I know I should have probably confronted Sandy about it, in all honesty, but I think I was nervous about broaching it with him. And as it turned out, Al was a pretty good listener. We'd been WhatsApping quite a bit before that, having a laugh and even being a bit flirting. Although I had become a bit frustrated that it was just text, and he hadn't asked me out for a drink yet or asked me around to his, despite my hints. But I valued his rational approach to it. He told me that it was most likely all innocent. There would be an innocent explanation, but that if any clothes were missing, then that would probably be a bit more sinister.
She laughed off the suggestion at first, but then she checked her wardrobe, and in doing so discovered to her horror that an expensive Doan dress was actually missing.
There was no way I would have misplaced my Doan. It was one of my own expensive indulgences, this £400 cocktail dress that I'd worn all of, well, once. And it was gone from my wardrobe. I was really freaking out now. I messaged Al right back. He told me to be calm, but I was getting a little frustrated that he wasn't asking me to come and hang out with him or offer to come up to my flat to make me feel safe. And then he said, "Do you think he could have anything to do with these prostitutes that are going missing?" Well, my bowels very nearly empty there and then.
The late nights, the strange comings and goings in the flat, the odd way he talked about women. Kay became convinced that Sandy was not only creeping around her room and taking her personal items, but also that he had something to do with the awful disappearances of the local women.
I'd started to build this picture in my head of him, of Sandy being Miss Creeper, a monster really, and I just couldn't shake that. I just wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't just get up and go. Like, where would I move to? London is expensive, and I was stuck in a tenancy contract, which makes it very difficult to leave before the end of that contract, and I only had limited funds. My dad lived in Suffolk, so staying with him was out of the question. If I wanted to keep my job, that was.
Kay started spending more time at work and attending early morning yoga and late breathing classes so as to spend as little time in the apartment as possible. And although Al was still texting and flirting with her a lot, his reluctance to have her around for a drink or even to take her out was frustrating Kay. So after giving him a subtle ultimatum, he'd finally agreed to have her around for a meal.
On the Wednesday morning, I did my usual, got up early and went straight to my yoga class. But when I returned back home, I just got a fright of my life. Standing in the hall was Sandy, looking really shocked. And in his hand, he was holding a pair of my knickers. Yes, my underwear. I just screamed at him and called him every swear were going. And he looked horrified, he looked scared, he looked frightened. And he just kept repeating that it wasn't what it looked like. The more I screamed, the closer he got to me to try and calm me down, I guess, which of course made me scream even more. But my anger, rage quickly turned to fear because I was then worried, what he might do to me. Do to me whatever he did to those poor women. So all I wanted to do was get out of there and never ever return. But Sandy grabbed me to stop me fleeing, and he kept repeating that he'd just woken up, found the front door open, and saw my knickers on the floor, and he was just picking them up. I mean, of course, I didn't believe any of this. So I kicked him as high as I could, and I just ran out of there.
While this was happening, an unusual turn of events had occurred. Up at the top of their road, a major underground water pipe had burst, forcing hundreds of thousands of gallons of water down the street, turning the roads in this small part of North London into a turbulent river. Axton Court was one of the many buildings within a half-mile radius to be affected.
As I ran down the stairs, I didn't really have a plan. I just wanted to never return to that flat or see Sandy ever again. But not knowing many people, I was just going to knock on Owl's door and find refuge in there. But as I neared the bottom, as I neared the foyer, I could see that it was just submerged underwater. It was like something out of a movie, a horror movie. I'm trapped, and now Sandy is behind me on the stairs. I want to dive in and take my chances just to get away from him, but he grabs me and pleads for me not to. Tells me it's too dangerous. That was debris from the street being churned about in the foyer from the strong currents. I mean, and it did look pretty violent, but I would have rather taken my chances there than be anywhere near him. But I felt so vulnerable, and so I'm just frozen there on the step, thinking, do I just jump in? But then I see something, and it's my bright, flowery Goan dress, my £400 cocktail dress, floating in the water amongst the debris, and it's floating up from the basement.
Al's flat was the only one in the basement, and being underground, it took the brunt of the force from the tsunami of water, forcing thousands of gallons in, flooding his flat and displacing his belongings, and forcing them up to the ground level.
I begin seeing other things of mine floating from out of there, including the t-shirt I didn't even realise was missing.
But none of this was as shocking as to what she saw next.
I heard suddenly gasp behind me, and he let out a cry, and then I saw it, a heavily decomposed body of a woman, her feet and hands bound by cable, followed by another body, and they were coming up from the basement, up from Elle's apartment.
Police identified the bodies as two prostitutes who had gone missing from the local area and whose missing posters Kay had walked past on a daily basis. Equally as disturbing was that when the water finally subsided, police found two bags, one with some of Kay's belongings in, taken from her bedroom, and another with knives and tools in. His spare room was also found to be soundproofed, with locks on the outside of the door and a creepy peephole, as well as a bed with restraints. All this, it was assumed, was set up to use on Kay for when she was to come for her dinner date.
Horrified, just horrified. I felt so sorry for those poor women, and the realisation that I came so close to being another victim of his, and I would have been if it wasn't for that blessed water pipe bursting. So I guess thank you, Thames Water, for your massive incompetence and years of underfunding that led to that water pipe bursting and ultimately saving my life.
Al, or Alan Waters, as he was known, never returned to his apartment, perhaps seeing from distance his crimes being exposed by the flood, and he is still on the run today, assumed to be living under a different alias, and perhaps even living in another block of apartments somewhere.